With offices in Radford and Blacksburg, Patrick K. Moore is a client-focused, community-involved law firm committed to you. If a legal issue touches your family, finances, or future, we can help. Whether it's real estate, business law, or estate planning, Patrick Moore welcomes the opportunity to speak with you about your legal issues.
Welcome, I'm Rose Martin, and we are right around the corner in Lexington, Virginia, with science fiction writer and geophysicist K.E. Lanning. Her Melt trilogy are speculative science fiction books with an eco-fiction spent. Now, let me tell you a little bit about them. A spider sat beside her, the sting of a bee, and listened to the birds. They question who we are as humans and our relationship and impact with the earth. Think about this for a minute. What if the ice caps really melted during one generation or during our lifespan? Something to think about. Kay, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
We're so happy to have you here. And as a geophysicist and now writing science fiction, and I should say speculative science fiction, I have to say when I read these, and we'll get into them a little bit later, I thought if someone's going to speculate about the way the earth is and what might be happening in the future, you would be the person to do that.
Well, thank you. Yes, it's something that I was interested in. And what I was looking at, again, what if something like the ice caps melted in one human lifespan? I mean, that's such a catastrophic event. What would happen to us socially? You would have people migrating, and the clash of cultures that would happen if you had people trying to escape from the sea level rise. And the other thing that would happen in that case would be the political power grabs that would be happening, because people trying to take advantage of this chaos.
And that's all throughout your book. So even though they're set in the future, you definitely still have that political chaos and that human interaction and all of those things that happen. Take me back to you as a young girl growing up in Houston. Was that what if always part of your nature, that you were wondering what's happening next or what might happen?
Yeah, I was always very curious, and we lived actually near NASA, relatively near NASA. But we lived on several acres, and so as a young child, I would go out into the woods and listen to the birds and try to catch rabbits and things like that. So it was always something of real interest to me. And then as I grew older, I got really interested in politics, actually, even as a fairly young child, just how people interact.
How about your family? Were they scientists? Were they writers?
My dad was a chemist. My mom was a nurse. And my dad was very educated, and that family had a lot of travel and different things that they did, his family from way back.
So did they instill in you the science, the writing? What did you gain?
Not writing. They more the science background, but as a speculative fiction writer / science fiction writer, it's always an investigation. And any kind of writer, if you're doing something, there's a lot of research that actually goes to put together a book that makes sense and that people will buy into, especially science fiction. You have to have a premise that somebody will get into.
Did you read those kind of books as a child?
Yes.
Were you interested? What were some of your favorites?
I read a lot of Asimov, Heinlein, Arthur C. Clarke, and the visualizations of all that, and the imagination really is pretty incredible, these people that spun these tales. And then, the Heinlein, as I got older, I read more of his social commentary, Stranger in a Strange Land, that type of thing. And that really intrigued me. And that goes into more the speculative fiction, which is kind of talking about the human condition, like Margaret Atwood and her writings. And that really intrigued me, because there's so much about politics and social things that affect us especially when you're talking about near future type fiction.
Well, and when you add that word near future, it really resonates, because you read that and you think, that's not that far out that you're speculating. You know, that's not that far out that you're saying, if we're not careful and we don't make some changes, that these things are more probable than they are perhaps in the future things to happen. You mentioned Margaret Atwood a minute ago, and I wrote down, because when you interviewed her, and I watched an interview you did with her, I liked a couple of things. First of all, she made the statement to you, writers go into the dark and illuminate what's there. And I thought, oh, that is so, intuitive to think about that.
Yeah.
Do you approach writing the same way?
Yeah, I think so. Probably not to the degree that Margaret does, but because one of the things that I'm interested in is, so you put a pebble on a slope, where does it go? And that's kind of how I approached it. It's like, okay, I'm putting together this scenario. What would happen? And I really tried to think through, okay, well, if this happened, then that would happen, and that would happen. And that's part of how you build the story. And then you try to put interesting characters in that story, because that's a lot of it. You want to have somebody you can, in effect, talk to, and you experience the events through them. And so if you don't sort of identify with these protagonists, you won't get into the book.
So if you think about your influences when you're writing, I mean, you've got this huge, rich background being a geophysicist anyway, and so I can see, as you talk about how you plan and you talk about the investigation, that scientific background comes through, so that you're very careful with details, right, to make sure you're doing that. But when you look at a literary influence, are they strictly science fiction, or do you rely on or get inspired by other writers also?
No, I mean, I've read quite a lot of literary fiction as well, and I really approach these from a literary fiction point of view, with having social commentary, developing characters that have an arc to them. Where they change as you go, and they learn as they go through the story. I do also have strong plot, action plot in there, because I wanted to have people are revealed when you put them into action. Just as we judge people and get to know people through their actions. That's the other thing that I tried to do. That's really interesting. Yeah. People
are revealed through their actions. So positive or negative, or just through their actions as a blanket?
Both ways.
Okay.
Yeah, both ways.
And how are they revealed?
Well, I mean, how does somebody react in a conflict? Do they fight? Do they give up? What do they do when they're facing? Like in the first book, Lowry is facing a situation where her life could be ruined by this person if she tells the truth. And yet she decides, no, I've got to tell the truth, for my sake, if nothing else. And so that's the type of action that you want to show how somebody would react to that. So, I mean, and wanting to have the literary side of it, because to me, I enjoy a book that does have a point of view, and does make some social commentary, because I think it's important. Now, some science fiction, that's not the case, but that's what I'm interested in.
So when you're starting and you're looking at that character development, and you mentioned Lowry, and do you give her a sense of, in your head or on paper, right and wrong ahead of time, and you plan out how her reactions are going to be? Or does the story unfold in a way that then the characters reveal themselves and you get it on paper? How does that unfold?
The way I do it is sort of get a general sense of what the character is, and a general sense of the plot. But I really like to let things see what happens, as I'm writing, and kind of go back and forth, because it's fun, I think, for the writers to sort of go, well, what's going to happen next?
Right, yeah,
and that's sort of what we like to do.
And I was reading your blog post, and you had some really interesting takes on a couple of things. First of all, again with Margaret Atwood, when she talked about wonder tales, things taught that may not happen in real life. So I guess when you are writing, do you feel that things may or may not happen in real life? Because when we think about speculative science fiction that you're doing, and yet your strong science background, are you kind of projecting us into saying, watch out, yes, or I'm creating this in my mind?
There's a thread that goes through all the Melt Trilogy books of our relationship with the Earth. And particularly the last book is somewhat of, if we don't change, this is something that is only going to get worse. And to try to understand why we do the things we do as human beings. And some of the things that are honestly baked in.
Like what?
Just our fears of sort of open space. We like open spaces. We don't like maybe the thought that there's a panther behind a bush. I mean, we want to have a lawn cleared out around the house. I mean, those are instinctual things that, from the beginning when we were hunter-gatherers, that are still with us. And one of the points that I have a prologue in the last book, and it talks about, we are the gods of old. We have now gotten to the point where we are so powerful that we can destroy entire eco areas just like that. And
that's scary.
It is scary, and we're not thinking about it. We are just doing it. We're not kind of planning out. And one of the things that I was interested in is there a way to sort of, if you have nature, if you have Mother Earth as a constituent, if she has somehow a political point of view that is listened to, then maybe we could think through, if we're going to have a development somewhere, can we think through how to best do that, or do we need to do it? Or maybe we can change the location.
And I've heard, and I've read or heard that you say that the Earth is constantly communicating with us, and yet we may or may not be listening, and our actions, therefore, are having sometimes intended and sometimes unintended consequences.
Right.
So where are we missing the mark with what we should be learning from our natural surroundings?
Yeah.
From the Earth?
Well, I think that we are not, like I said, taking into account when you, perhaps even just farming somewhere, over-fertilizing. For example, the red tide in Florida, that's apparently coming from fertilizers. And I was speaking with somebody, and apparently they have opened up farming into the Okeechobee, if I'm saying that right, lake down there, and there is so much more fertilizer running off into the ocean down there. I mean, it's just little things.
So
like
you're
that.
saying, look, right now the Earth is speaking to us, and
right.
It's giving very clear signals of what we need to be doing or not doing. The same thing with clear cutting, probably, right? And seeing water run off and those things. So I have to know, how did you bridge interest in science, being a geophysicist, doing the mapping that you do, to writing novels?
I've always been a creative person. I've actually done photography and different things.
And you had an art gallery, right?
Yeah, I had an art gallery, and really loved supporting the artists. And I just, I always had that side of me. I read voraciously as a kid. And it's like once I you just get this itch, and you just go, I want to do this. This is something I'm interested in doing it, and I really love it. I mean, even it's kind of odd. Even the editing process is
You love
interesting.
the editing?
Yeah, because you're like flipping around, and it's a little puzzle that you work on and try to make it flow. So even that part of it, which can be difficult at times, but that's even interesting.
How long does it take for you to complete each book, or were you working kind of on these simultaneously with different outlines and knowing where they were going to go?
Somewhat simultaneously. I mean, the first book probably took over 10 years to really come to fruition. And I actually had started writing pieces of The Sting of the Bee before the other books, but I wanted to do A Spider Sat Beside Her as I called it a prequel for a while there, and then I wound up just putting them all together. But they were sort of simultaneous, but finished one after another.
And I've heard other writers say that, you know, it makes you a little vulnerable to put your work out into the world when you've had that baby for 10 years and you've been working and it's close. Who's your first read, or the one that tells you, you know, hey, Kay, pull back on this, or I don't really see where you're keeping this together?
Editing. You really have to have good editors, and you have to, the best ones really are ones honestly you pay for, because
not your husband, right?
Oh,
not
no.
your family members.
No, because you don't want necessarily a friend to do it.
Right.
It's more someone who is just going to be mean as a snake and you know, tell you change this, or why did you do that?
Well, and that's true, right? Because you want the best product out there, so you want someone that's going to mark it up, and then send it back to you. Because having that cold read, or someone who's not as close to it, you know, is probably really, really helpful.
Yeah, and I tried to. I found people who were professional editors, and I had a developmental editor, which they sort of do the big picture and you know, tell you where you might have plot things you need to change, or characters you need to, you know, adjust and things like that. And then you go through a copy editor phase, and it's better if you have a separate person for that. And then, you know, I do have some writer friends that have been kind enough to.
And that network is important. So let's get to the books. So the Melt trilogy, we've got climate change, and we've got catastrophic climate change first. And then your main character, Lowry, is in space. So let's start there with, and The Spider Sat Beside Her, your titles were very interesting for each of these.
Thank you.
And I have to say, as I've gone through, I've tabbed all my books, the one-liners or the sentences that make you stop and think, and you can tell, like, she's got a message right here, and she wants us all to pause for here. And I'm guessing that was really deliberate?
Yeah. I mean, I really, and sometimes really kind of doing the punch.
Yeah, you felt it. You got it.
Yeah, so the title, actually, A Spider Sat Beside Her, is a metaphor. And the spider represents the political puppet masters. And the her, in this case, is both the main character, Lowry Walker, and the Mother Earth herself. And people who take advantage and manipulate things. And, you know, most of us are down here just sort of, you know, fixing dinner and surviving day to day. And yet you have these, you know, few people who are making an incredible amount of decisions for all of us that we aren't even aware of.
And I love the technology. So from having the robot drones to having the dogs to having all of those things in book one, particularly the false gravity, I found that really fascinating that they come into the space station and then gradually there's a false gravity. So as you worked all of that into it, I could actually visualize myself thinking what that might be like, that they would just fly there and back.
Yeah.
But what a strong female character Lowry was.
Oh, well, thank you.
And what a strength of, you know, fortitude for her to have to and choose to tell the truth.
Right.
Even when it wasn't the popular option. And there was a twist at the end. I'm not going to give it away, but that was, I did not see that coming, I will have to say. Carol, our co-producer, she read it before me. She goes, I can't tell you because you're not there yet. So we can't talk about this until you're done, which was awesome.
Yeah.
And then in book two, set it up for us. So it's about 10 years later.
Yes. And so Lowry Walker is, again, one of the main characters, but I introduce a new main character, John Barris. And at this point, this 10 years after the first book, the UN has decided they're going to open up the now bare, de-iced continent of Antarctica to homesteading. And maybe a little unwisely, they've decided to have this big PR event and do it as like an Oklahoma-style land rush, Mad Max, that type of thing. And so John Barris is in the merged country of Amarata, which is when America and Canada have...
Which was a fascinating...
Have merged. Yeah,
that was fascinating. The same thing when I read, there used to be a place called Florida, right?
Yeah.
And we're moving monuments, and people are sailing around them. So then the land rush, to visualize that we, I was right there while they're on those things their hovers going through there trying to stake their land. So really, really visual, but also frightening, where you talk about how the land isn't what it used to be, and what a loss for civilization because of the impact of human decisions on that, right?
Yeah.
And then how about the third book?
Yeah, so the third book, John Barris, who had tried to escape from politics and sort of the corporate social world, gets very reluctantly thrown into the presidency. And it really kind of talks about and ties a bow around basically the relationship between nature and humans, and his effort to try to create a balanced society. Mm-hmm. And yet on every side, he's having to deal with all this politics and craziness and this treason that has filtered up from his own inner circle. So it's...
and at the same time, you've woven a love story into...
Yes.
Look at what's happening to the earth, and this is happening in the future, 100 years out. So when we look at that, that's when we look at speculative science fiction and the impact on our world and the impact on the human condition, it was really fascinating to be able to go through those and see what you were doing and the worlds that you were creating in each of those books.
Yeah,
really.
And I did a lot of research as far as what type of plants would be on Antarctica, things like that. But it is real important to have a love story and have relationships in there, because those really, they carry the story. Mm-hmm. And that's really what people are interested in. And so the plot and the characters have to sort of be together and make sense, but have people that people fall in love with.
And you were bringing them to us as we know now, but then you also had the technological advances of the robots and building a house in one day for each of those homesteaders, right?
Yeah,
and how they did their plans. So that technology, was that something you created? The words that you have for the different robots and the dog, even the horse that had covered with hair.
I tried to sort of visualize. We're 100 years out at this point in the second book, particularly, and what are you going to have? And how do you create, particularly farming that doesn't have fertilizers, doesn't have to have chemical weed eater type things, and you have something where you have a robot that does
that gets right back to your what if.
Yeah, exactly.
What if?
Yeah.
Would you be willing to read for us?
Sure.
And why don't you set it up? What did you choose?
So this is a scene out of A Spider Sat Beside Her. And Lowry Walker is in a situation where she is being pushed to basically testify against an Inuit leader who the nefarious administration of Amarata is trying to disenfranchise from all their land. And so this is Elliot Halder, who is a really nasty attorney general. And he's, again, trying to force her to testify in his way. Halder pivoted toward her. He stood motionless, staring at her with callous eyes, like someone accelerating toward a squirrel in the road. Then, with his lips clamped into a fixed smile, he approached her chair with deliberate steps and leaned over her shoulder, placing his hand on the table. He began to speak, and Lowry flinched against his breath, caressing her cheek. "You see, Lowry, life just isn't fair. The settlers are moving into the land to the north, just like the European settlers did when this continent was first colonized." His voice dropped to a whisper, and the hair rose on the back of Lowry's neck. "It's as simple as this. The people of Amarada want that land, and the people will get it." He smiled down at her with teeth perfect and white. "And there's not a rat's ass thing you or I can do about it. It's the human way."
And that human way, wow. You've given us so much insight into things that we need to do, and I hope that people will pick up the books and read them.
Thank you.
Do you have a message for your viewers, for your fans? What would you like them to know about you?
That really think about what you're doing. You know, when you even, trying to recycle and things like that. I mean, it is, we really need to think about where do we want to be in 100 years? And let's put that out there. Where do we want to be? And then figure out how to get there.
It's been great meeting you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Special thanks to K.E. Lanning for inviting us here into her home to share her work and this Melt trilogy, these wonderful speculative science fiction novels. If you'd like to know more about K.E., the work that she does, her background as a geophysicist, you can check out her website. Or how about more of our extended interview online, because we've got a lot more to talk about. I'm Rose Martin, and I hope to see you next time right around the corner.